Welcome back to part 2 of this video. Now, 28 link building methods and other SEO methods were covered in the first part of this video, and of course there are more than 28 different SEO and link building methods that exist. So what we're going to do in this video is we have another 27 link building methods and 1 or 2 non-link building methods that we're going to discuss, and we'll go ahead and add these onto our existing tier list from the last video so that we can make the truly definitive tier list for SEO link building methods. Let's start by talking about RSS feeds. And if you don't know what an RSS feed, essentially it is a page you can add to your site, and you can look up how to do this in more depth, but the short version is that they will allow your content to easily be crawled and syndicated onto other sites. Now, that's used sometimes for like RSS readers, but it's also used sometimes either for like content syndication, or people will like scrape people's content and syndicate it onto their own site. So if you do have an RSS feed, you do increase the chance that people will scrape and syndicate your content. Now, there are a few limitations to this method. First of all, the links associated with these kinds of RSS feed sort of scraping bots are generally not the highest in the world. So they might be links, and they're probably even helpful links, but they're not exactly generally going to be from authoritative sites. Of course, the benefit to adding an RSS feed is that it's very easy to do. It takes you maybe an hour, even if you have to do something kind of custom. And if you have something like WordPress, you probably even have one set up by default. Now, it's not exactly the most revolutionary link building method, but it is probably worth doing. And you do probably also want to note that you might still get some of these kinds of scraped links even without an RSS feed. 256 kilobytes, for example, does get a number of these sorts of like scraped and syndicated articles, even though we do not currently have an RSS feed. Now, I'm going to put this down in D tier. It's a fine method. There really isn't too much to do with it besides setting it up. It's nothing revolutionary. You're not going to rank for any kind of particularly large keyword just by having an RSS feed, but it can be one more thing that will get you some links kind of casually on the side. And one thing to note is that if you are trying to get these RSS feed links, is that it is a good idea often to have some internal links to your own other articles within the text of your articles. That's generally a good idea in general, but sometimes these kinds of scraped links will not actually link back to the original source. But if you do have internal links that go back to your own site, those will actually stay in the content generally, unless they like remove all of the links from their scraped content. So these are solidly mediocre, but easy to set up, and it's kind of a one-time thing. Social media links. Now, I talked about these a little bit when we talked about social signals last time. Social signals, I generally think of as people who are saying, we sell like likes or something, and if you get more likes, then your site will rank better. Now, that's clearly not true, as discussed previously, but the actual links from social media can be good. And I've seen people rank very well by using social media campaigns, just getting backlinks from social media sites. And if you have a post, even if it's new, your site's pretty new, but it gets to like the front page of Reddit, or it gets retweeted 1,000 times, you certainly can get that page indexed and even ranking relatively quickly. For example, the Joe Biden site discussed previously, where it was kind of a parody site, was ranking page 1 for Joe Biden and a number of other variations on Joe Biden within a few days of that site actually being set up. And a large part of that was due to social media links. So these are solidly B tier. You can do these, these are primarily something you're going to see in white hat niches. You can't really do that if you sell like Viagra. Well, I guess you can, but it's not going to be anywhere near as successful. Review and testimonial links. Now, these links are essentially what you do is say there's a site and they sell something, and you've used that product ideally, or sometimes people will just say they've used the product. And you say, hey, we reviewed this, we think it's good, here's our testimonial, you can link to us with a backlink. These links sound really good in theory. You can get them from sometimes even home pages and point them at your site just by leaving a testimonial. So that's good, but the limitation to this is that generally pages, if they're choosing a few reviews to put on their homepage, they are going to want to have the very best reviews to put onto their homepage or their about page or similar. So they're important pages. If you happen to be someone that is very notable, who it would actually be a really big boost to them to have your personal review on that site or your brand's review on that site, then these are potentially an excellent link building method because, well, you are an authority sort of figure or a famous person or whatever that people are going to actually want to have that testimonial on their site. Now, the problem with these link building methods is that generally there aren't very many testimonials included on a site's homepage or about page. They're generally just featuring maybe 2 or 3, and generally they want the very best thing. So these are very limited in terms of getting these kinds of links for the average website owner. If you happen to stumble into a scenario where, for example, you know someone who sells something, or you kind of have a partnership with someone, or you already sort of have connections, then these kinds of testimonial links can be very useful, although they're very limited in that you can only really get them very situationally. So they're very situational. They can be good when you are actually able to get them, but because of their situationality, we're going to put these in we'll put them in C tier as a situational thing that can be useful, but they are very difficult to do on purpose or to go out of your way to get. Now, that's not to say that they aren't good. I've gotten 1 or 2 pretty solid testimonial links in the past, but as a method, they are very limited. Stealing inferior links. Now, this method refers to finding a piece of content that is inferior to your own, and that's the easy part. There are a number of ways you can do that. Find something you wrote that's actually good, and then find some kinds of shittier versions of those pages. Then what you can do there is you go to Hrefs or similar or some other backlink checking tool and figure out who links to that inferior piece of content. Then you email them and you say, hey, I have a better piece of content. Now the theory is, well, maybe they just didn't know there was a better piece of content or whatever, and they'll link to you because your content is better. They might replace the link or maybe add an additional link. In practice, these are kind of the same as the suggesting 404 replacement sorts of links. People generally aren't going to reply to those kinds of emails because they seem like spam because, well, they are kind of spam. And the other thing about them is that if you're asking for someone to like remove someone else's link, it kind of makes your site seem even spammier because it seems like you're going out of your way to fuck people over. Now, I'm sure that similarly to suggesting 404 replacements, you can get people to do these things, although I think this is honestly going to be even less plausible to get links from than suggesting 404 replacements. It's the kind of thing that sounds good in theory, but that in practice is not going to work very well in general. So we'll put this down in like D tier. Next, we'll talk about another kind of situational link building method, which are plugin, theme, / developer footer links. So you might see these, for example, if you see something like powered by GeneratePress or powered by WordPress even might link back to the WordPress homepage. You might see sites where they say like, this site was built by insert development company here, and so on and so forth. Now, these links can be very authoritative. They can be on, well, the footer, but that also means they're on like the homepage of a site that is potentially very authoritative. And if you are in a scenario where you're developing plugins or you're a developer by trade, they're certainly something that are worth doing. If you were like a full-time web dev, this is something you might include in your main link building portfolio, is having a kind of footer credit link to your site on your, or to the sites you've built for clients onto that page. Now, the limitation to this is that if you're only trying to do this for links, well, you have to go find sites and then develop them for people, or develop a whole plugin or a whole theme just to kind of get these links. So that's a huge ordeal that can potentially be very successful. There are some plugins that have a ton of links from being very successful plugins, but that's also because they're generally plugins that a lot of work have gone into. So they're very situational. They can be powerful links if you happen to be in a scenario where you can use them. So due to the situationality of these, we're going to put them, we'll even put them in like, I'll put them in B tier as situational links that are worth building if you can get them, but because of the limitations associated with trying to actually create that, if you're not already in a position to do so, they're relatively limited for the average website owner. I have heard of people doing things like buying up old plugins and then having like a link added into that and say like, this was developed by us, or this is the official page, and then you add a page to your site or so on. So that's potentially something you can think about if you have the budget to go around and try to buy up a WordPress plugin or something along those lines. Regardless, there's still a relatively situational link building method. Expired Twitter account links. We actually already covered these under Expired Web 2.0, so I'm going to group these with these. This is essentially the same context or concept. You find URLs that used to be associated with particular Twitter accounts that are no longer associated with those accounts, then you register that username, and now you have that page. You can use it to build links, and so on. It's a fine link building method. If you're in a black hat niche, it might be something that's worth doing. Again, it's the same as Expired Web 2.0s. They are, well, really just go watch that section. Next, we're going to talk about unlinked mentions. So what actually are unlinked mentions? Unlinked mentions, which we're going to put down in C tier for the same reason as these review testimonial links, are essentially that you find somewhere where someone has said like something, this brand name said blah, 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 and they didn't link to you, but they mentioned your brand. And the idea is you email them or you contact them and you say, hey, you mentioned our brand. Would you mind linking to us in the text of that article? And what is likely the case is that they probably even would. Out of all these methods, like I usually ignore like 404 replacement requests and like kind of generic outreach a lot of times. But if I did mention a brand and someone emailed me and said, hey, can you give me a link to my brand, I probably even would go and do that for them because I already kind of mentioned their brand. So out of all the kind of outreach type things, it's certainly one that I think is more plausible that people would do. Now, the limitation to that is, well, you have to find places that already mentioned your brand. And if you work for like a company or you are like an SEO consultant for a large brand name company, this might actually be a pretty useful method because there might be a lot of unlinked mentions to your brand. So if that is the case, maybe this is even like a B tier link building method, maybe even A tier potentially, if that is something that works for your brand. Now, I would say the average, at least like kind of independent person who's running like a smaller site is probably not going to have that many unlinked mentions to the point where it's probably not going to be super useful to go and find these. And then even if you are a larger site, unless you're working for something that's really massive to the point where there are just unlimited of these unlinked mentions that you can just keep go and find, you can just keep finding, you are going to run into the problem of, well, you can only do this when there are unlinked mentions, and there's a finite number of those, and that's going to be based on, well, essentially kind of hoping that people happen to have unlinked mentions to you. So the strategy is essentially be a large company and then hope more people give you more unlinked mentions. So it's situational. You can probably even get some results with it, but there are some limitations associated with that. Next, let's talk about local listings and directories. These are pretty similar to directory submissions in general, so what's listed below here, but the difference is that some of these are actually relatively clean. So directory submissions in general tend to refer to these extremely generic lists of articles that are essentially just pages where people submit spam links, and they're completely full of trash, no one uses them, and they literally just exist for link building. Now, there are some local listings and directories that can actually be halfway decent. So really specific things. And I would say local listings more than like niche related directories, but things like if you run a local dentist, it might be worth it to find a site that lists local dentists. If you run a law firm, it might be worth it to be listed on somewhere like Avo or whatever it's called, where you list lawyers and so on and so forth. So it is probably worth it if you are in a local niche to try to look for some of these listings. Again, it's kind of similar to these other ones where it's sort of limited in that there are only going to be so many local listings and directories that are actually halfway decent. All in all, it's not a bad link building method, but again, the links are generally not the best thing in the world, although they can be halfway decent, particularly if there's something relevant to your specific niche. And if it is a local listing that's actually relevant to a particular service you sell, you might even get some sales off of that. Like sometimes those directories are actually halfway useful. Something like Craigslist, but more specific. So they're worth doing, kind of limited in the number that you can get, but if you're in a niche where that applies to you, they can be worth finding. Next, we'll talk about intern and job postings. Now, this is a thing you can do. If you need like a intern or you are actually hiring, there are places you can list job postings that will link back to your site. Now, the limitation to this is that, well, you're kind of actually expected to hire people, and in some cases you might have to pay a fee for those kinds of listings, and they also might not really renew themselves. So it could be something where it kind of falls off the front page and it fades into oblivion, or even gets removed entirely after a certain amount of time. So we're going to put these down in E tier. They can potentially be halfway useful links if you happen to be in a scenario where you are already hiring, but I really wouldn't use these for link building. In fact, I'm tempted to even put them down in F tier in that like they're not going to be particularly great permanent links, but they could be temporarily useful links. So we'll put them in like E tier. They could go in F tier. Sponsor events, venues, and so on. So this is almost like, I would almost consider this to be like a more white hat version of donor and sponsor links. I'm actually going to leave them in A tier as well and kind of cluster this together. So the difference I would say is that donor and sponsor links, you're usually kind of scraping through a list of footprints like in URL donor or like in URL sponsors or in URL are supporters or something. Whereas this, I would consider this to be more like going out of your way to sponsor someone who might not even have explicitly have a donor or sponsor page, or they're running a particular event, or maybe if you're really rich, you might like sponsor the local stadiums. Now it's like Pepsi Stadium or whatever, and you probably get a link out of that after spending like $1 million sponsoring the stadium. So there's different scales of doing that. But I did see there is like one semi-local finance company that I've seen that got a lot of really good like donor type links, except they were from actually sponsoring legitimate things. Now I bet they were just sponsoring those for unrelated reasons, but you definitely, if you work for a corporate company, you might be able to get some good money by just sponsoring people in general, maybe like a tax write-off, and then you even could get a bonus link out of that. So I'd kind of consider this to be just like a harder core, potentially more expensive, potentially better, potentially fewer other outbound links, and potentially less spammy in a lot of cases. Although there are some clean donor and sponsor links. There are actually a fair number of clean donor and sponsor links. And even the ones that aren't clean, people are still clearly getting results with. But anyway, this is basically just this again, except potentially, well, the things I just said. Creating an affiliate program. Now, this is another thing where you kind of have to have a substantial budget to do this. And I've talked a little bit before in a different video about why affiliate programs have some limitations. It seems like, oh, I'll just make an affiliate program and people will do free marketing for me. I just pay them as a % of the sales. Now, you run into some problems with those in that, first of all, you have to get people to actually use your program. If you're just some completely new company, people aren't necessarily going to trust you and actually participate in your affiliate program. So there are some limitations in getting that to work. You have to prevent people from doing things like cookie spoofing or cookie stuffing. You have to prevent people from doing things like trying to send fake traffic and so on. And you're going to have a lot of people trying to fuck you over. You might have people making sites where they're impersonating you and then saying things that aren't true, or misleading people, or saying things that are false advertising, and you are, at least to some extent, responsible for what your affiliates do. So you get into a lot of work actually trying to manage these kinds of programs. You can do them on a smaller scale, though. Like, sometimes people just have a smaller affiliate program for, like, their existing customers and so on. So again, these are something where you might be able to get some links from people actually marketing your affiliate products, but you'd have to already have a kind of pretty large site to be able to get that to even work in the first place. So I'd kind of cluster this again with these. You are technically also supposed to no-follow affiliate links, I believe, but a lot of people don't do that, so it's kind of irrelevant. As far as link building methods go, I think you could potentially get some good links, although it's also the kind of thing where if you're doing this, you shouldn't be doing it solely for links. Maybe that's a side effect of it, but I really wouldn't consider this to be a link building method. So I'm going to put this either, it could go in like C or D tier. I think it would work for getting links, although it's relatively situational to where you would want to be like a large company. It probably belongs in, well, I'm going to put it in D tier just because it honestly shouldn't be done as a link building method. It should be done because you actually want to run the affiliate program, because you're going to be in a position where you also have to run that affiliate program as well. So it's going to go in D tier. You can get some good results from affiliate programs, but you really shouldn't consider this to be a link building method. Oh, this is the wrong thing. Next, let's talk about link exchanges. So this is a blast from the past, so to speak, because no one's really directly talked about link exchanges since like 1999. So the concept is pretty basic. I say, hey, I'll link to you from my like about page, and you link to me from your about page. Now, this isn't the same as like, oh, I run an SEO blog, you run an SEO blog, and we both happen to interlink to each other. That's not quite the same thing. It's people going out of their way to kind of do these half-assed links, usually from like a directory of links, or like a directory on their about page or their staff page or their sidebar or something. So if you're doing these in the sense of, well, the standard way that you would actually talk about a link exchange, where you're just kind of doing a half-assed link from like both of your staff pages, especially if you both have other crap listed to where it's obvious you're just doing like a link exchange, that's something you could plausibly get penalized for it. Like, it probably would look really weird if there were a manual review of your site. The thing though about these is that, like, similarly to SAPE links, like not quite the same, like these just don't exist anymore. Like, no one does this to the point where it's hard to even classify it as a link building method because it doesn't even really exist in current year. Like, no one does like blatant link exchanges in current year, so it's just going to go down in like F tier. Like, you could do like a subtle link exchange where you say, hey, I'll write an article where I link to you, you write an article where you link to me, but we'll actually do a good job. But you're kind of just getting into the point of like exchange of like guest posts. It's just like a general guest post. Like, you can link to a site that also links to you. Like, that's completely fine. That's not really what a link exchange would be considered to be. Editorial links. Okay, what is an editorial link? So what an editorial link refers to is a link where someone just happens to link to you naturally. Now, that's not very exciting. That's basically just you sitting around and waiting and making good content. So I wouldn't even really classify that as like a link building method. Sometimes people will like lie and say like, oh, we get you editorial links from like sites that we have relationships with. It's like, that's just called guest posting. So editorial links really are just like sitting around waiting for you to get links. If you happen to have a site that is like good and you have users that read your site, you might get some of these links, but they're not a link building method. So for that reason, like, they're just going to go in F tier. The links can be very good, but you can't get them on purpose. They basically are just you sitting around and waiting. So that's fucking F tier. Linkable assets and link bait. So what are these? The concept is almost like editorial links, but like trying to get them. And generally what people do when they talk about like linkable assets or like link bait, which just kind of, it just reeks of guru-ness, is, oh, we'll make a thing that's like, that people really like to link to. Oh, people like infographics. The kids these days like the infographics and the nice interactive guides and all that shit. And it's like, yes, true. Like, if you make really good content that has like some nice like multimedia, then like you probably increase the chance of people like linking to your content. But that's just because your content is better. Like, this is literally just saying like, make your content good and then like people will link to you. Like, specifically it refers to like making things that are kind of have like multimedia type shit. That might improve the probability of you getting links, but it's not really a method. It's not really a method any differently from like just sitting around waiting. Although there is like a little bit of effort into it, so we're gonna say like, I don't know, D tier or E tier. This is essentially the same as just like making good content. Next, let's talk about microsites. So what is a microsite? And this is almost like building a PBN from scratch almost. Although, like, white hat, like in air quotes. Every time anyone says white hat, just wrap it in air quotes. Now, what a microsite is say I have, like, a gimmicky site. So say we have 256 kilobytes, and say we have, like a I don't know, like some, like, one-off event, or, like, a kind of gimmick, like a calculator, or, like, a parody site. Like, here's something. So there's this like one-page site, computercoins.website, and it's like this one-page site. It's like a joke about like Bitcoin. It's pretty funny. I think it even has a fair amount of links, and it's kind of like a novelty site. And then what you would do is you would make something like this, and then you would have like at the bottom you might say like this is a novelty site by like I think this is his actual site. I don't think this guy even really did this to just get links. Like maybe he did. He probably did. He probably just did this for the lulz. But you could do this same kind of concept, or like Ted Cruz for human president is the same kind of thing. It's just like a one-page site. But you could do this, and then you could put a link and say like made by us or whatever. And then these sites, they are actually kind of, you can get a fair amount of like links or momentum from like Reddit or some kind of social media campaign, because people do like these sort of gimmicky type things. The limitation is that first of all, you have to make this website. So like that's not necessarily that hard to make a single page website. It's a one-page website, obviously. Like you could build this in a day pretty easily. The limitation is more that, first of all, this isn't your site, so you probably don't care about this site. You would be using it as like one tier away. So you'd be getting the link from here, from this site, from your one-page site, which is fine. It can be a good link, but then you're very dependent on getting it to take off on social media. So it's kind of like a hit or miss thing where you're putting a lot of effort into it to potentially have it miss and not be successful. So if you have a really good idea for something like this, you can potentially get some traffic with it, but you're very much like, you very much have to like go all the way with it, and then there's still the chance that you fuck it up. And you also are going to end up having to pay things like domain registration fees. You can probably use your same web host, like that's probably fine. But you're still going to have to pay like $14 for this, and you might have to pay $14 indefinitely. Well, you would if you want to keep the link over time. So you have some costs that can be higher than you might expect, and you also are really dependent on getting this to take off. I actually wrote something about this on like, it was on a different forum back in the day, and that post doesn't even exist anymore. But there was something, I did experiment with this a little bit. I think it has some limitations. I think it sounds good, but you have to deal with costs, and it's also very hit or miss. So I think it's funny. Like, I think it's funny, and I think it's funny, but I don't think it's actually that good. I'm gonna put it in like E tier. It's funny. I bet you could pull it off, but it's way too hit or miss for my personal tastes. You might be able to not have those costs by having it as a subdomain on your main domain. That might be funny, actually. You might do that. It would be better if you did it as a subdomain of your main domain, as like, that would be funny, actually. That might even bump it up to D tier. I still think it's a lot of work for something that could potentially fail. I would definitely, if I were going to do this, I would definitely do it as a subdomain of a main domain, and then link back to the main domain. I don't know, it's E tier. It could go up to D tier. Well, I'm going to leave it in E tier. It could go up to D tier. Next, let's talk about resource pages. So these are essentially a form of outreach where you find like lists of resources. Let's say like here's a list of like tutorials, or here's a list of tools, or here's a list of whatever that you can use for things. A lot of times universities will have them. They're kind of an antiquated thing. Like I think most sites like really don't have these resource pages. I see them on like universities or like university coursework because all universities are like 20 years behind the current date. So there are some. I actually experimented with this some, and I got a few replies for like listing things on resource pages. And I think there are a few good resource pages out there. Most of them have like 1 billion links on them, so that might kind of saturate those pages and the utility. I think they're doable links, although, again, there's only so many of these that are actually good, and then the other thing is they're often fairly saturated. So I'd put them down here in, like, D tier with things where it's, well, if there were more of them, they'd be up in, like, C tier potentially, but they're really very saturated, and there aren't really that many of them, and a lot of times they're very saturated. So they're down in, like, D tier. Link reclamation. So what is link reclamation? Essentially, this is where you might lose a link because someone removed a link to your site. They used to link to you, they edited it out of the article or whatever for whatever reason, or otherwise that link doesn't exist. Now, this is all kind of in the same category of, like, emailing people with stupid shit that they don't care about. They might put the link back in, but it's like, if they took the link out of the article, there's probably a reason why they did that, and they probably would just be annoyed by you contacting them, like, hey, I noticed you removed the link to our site, could you, like, put that back? Like, they don't necessarily hate you. I mean, maybe they decided they hate you, but there's a good chance that they removed it for a reason, and you just kind of seem like you're fucking begging for people to give you links back. Like, like, honestly, I think this is, like, degrading. Like, I would not do this just because it seems fucking degrading. Like, situationally, maybe there's a reason for that, but it's like, the internet, like, the internet doesn't care about you. Things happen, and people have to, like, update their sites, and, like, it just seems, like, cringy and gross. You might get the link back, but kind of the same as, like, asking for 404 link replacements and shit. It's just stupid spam that people don't want to fucking see. and it's degrading, and you look like a fool. This is an E tier. Help a reporter out. So I was just talking to Hash Brown in the Slack chat, which you can join if you haven't already. There's a public Slack chat linked on the sidebar of 256 kilobytes. And I was talking to Hash Brown about these, and we both kind of have the same impression of these sort of help a reporter out type links. And I'm going to put them in B tier, and I'll tell you why in a second. So for those of you who don't know, help a reporter out links, HARO, essentially what you do is you either will get on like an email list, or you'll go on like Twitter or whatever, and you'll find groups or like email lists or like contacts where there will be people who are like writing articles for companies and so on, or for news sites who are looking for a little more about a particular topic. They might not know a lot about something, but they're saying like, oh, hey, we're writing a story about hockey. Does anyone have like a good link about like the best something or whatever? Now, it does seem to in fact be the case that you can get a lot of success with these. Hash Brown was talking about how he knows someone who had a lot of success with these, and he got like 200 or 300 links per month for his company. Now, I think that's a thing you can do. I think you could potentially be very successful at that. However, it's also the kind of thing where the average person who tries to do this probably doesn't get like any links from these, because there are a lot of people who want to do this method, and there are a lot of sites that are run by people who want to do this method that are trash. So first of all, you're going to actually have some good content, because just because you've pitched a piece of content, it's not necessarily going to get linked. But then the second thing is you really have to kind of get into the circle of people who are actually writing articles and looking for people who can like link your stuff to them. So you're going to be using a method where a lot of people want to do this kind of thing, but where until you have built some trust with the people who are actually looking for these kinds of articles, it's unlikely that you're going to have a lot of success with this. So if you really want to try hard and go all the way, you could potentially get some results from this, although you're going to want to make sure that your brand is already pretty solid and your site already has some solid content, and it would really be the kind of thing where you're going to have to put a lot of effort into it to get some traction. But if you did go all the way with that, you might be able to get some really good results at link building if you did do that successfully. So if you were very, very good at this, you could maybe even put it up in like S tier. I would say for the average person, you probably wouldn't have that much success with this. Like I would say for the average person, this is like E tier, or like where they just wouldn't get any traction at all from doing it. Like realistically, there's 1,000 articles out there that say, oh, help a reporter out, it's the best thing in the world, it's the best thing in the world, it's the best thing in the world. But most of those articles are published by like really big names in SEO or like marketing, where it's like, yeah, well, of course that's a good link building method for you, because you have millions and millions of views and you are a huge brand name, so of course you can connect with reporters. For the average person, I would say it's not really that great of a method unless you're willing to put all the work in to build those connections with actual bloggers and so on, or actual bloggers, reporters, whatever. So for that reason, I'm putting it in B tier. You could be anywhere from like S to E tier depending on your ability. So we'll put it in B tier. It's B tier. Outreach. Outreach is a very general term, which essentially refers to contacting people and asking them to link to you. There's a lot of subcategories of outreach, like unlinked mentions would be a subcategory of outreach, suggesting 404 replacements, review and testimonial links, kind of. Resource pages. Really, you're contacting people, you're asking them to link to you, or you're suggesting something that they could link to. Again, it kind of depends on your exact sub-method. As a general concept, I'd put it in C tier. There's some ways you can pull it off. There are situations where it's going to be halfway decent. It would depend on your exact scenario. Kind of the same as everything else. A lot of the times when people are doing like outreach, they're really just kind of spamming people's inbox with stupid crap no one wants to look at. If you did it correctly, you could get some results. It depends on your scenario. So we'll put it in C tier. Emailing people that you mention, I would even put this maybe up in like B tier potentially. Like it's a form of outreach, but it's actually a kind of thing where if you do this cleanly, and you might also even say like emailing people that you know / link, or that you mention / just like linking to people in general. Not A tier. We'll put it in like, it could be like C or B tier. I'll put it in B tier because I wouldn't even necessarily say emailing them, but like either emailing people or like linking to people. People, especially if you're in like an SEO kind of niche, people definitely are aware when you link to them. Like people follow everything about their own brands. Like I've seen even like very obscure links about my own brand. Linking to someone certainly puts you on their radar. Whether or not you get a link from it kind of depends. I would say probably don't like fucking be an asshole and like constantly email people like asking for links, because that can kind of just fuck you over, where it's like, well, you just like established some like you talked about them, but then you kind of just like piss them off with an email, which almost makes it seem like you're just trying to get a link. So I think if you do this poorly, it could be spammy, but I think you can actually build relationships with people just by like linking to them and establishing that like you actually like their content and so on. Although I'd say that if you did this in like a very transparent way where you're obviously just kind of doing it for the links, I think people see through that relatively easily. Articles predated for next year. Now, this is not actually a link building method. This is more of a gimmick. So a lot of times people will look for like best shoes 2019 or whatever, and they'll look for the current year. So a lot of times people will update their article to say, okay, here is something 2018, then they'll update it at the end of the year, they'll update it again, they'll update it again, blah, 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 and so on and so forth, which is probably a good idea. Now, one idea that you might have is to take an article and then, for example, at the end of December, just update it to be about 2020 rather than 2019, and just update that in advance so that things can get crawled and processed before the end of the year, which can potentially give you a head start on being the first article, or one of the first articles, that is crawled and indexed about 2020 for the next year. As a method, I haven't tested this personally. I actually got this idea to put this on the list from Hash Brown, so I wonder if he has any particular insight into this. It seems like the kind of thing where it probably works fine and it probably gives you a slight boost or advantage, particularly at the start of the year where there might not be a lot of people who have updated their content to actually be about 2020 or whatever. I don't know where to put this. It's kind of hard to rank this. We'll put it in C tier as like, well, I don't know. I want to even just put it in D tier because I don't think it's that necessarily influential. It might be. It might be. It could go in like C or D tier. I almost want to put it in D tier just because C tier is so full of shit already, but that's not like a good reason to do that. It's kind. I'm actually not even sure. I haven't really messed around with this that much. I'm gonna put it in like D tier, although I could be convinced to. Well, this is all trash, I guess. RSS feeds actually probably belong above this crap. I'm going to put it in C tier as a situational thing that you could maybe get a little bit of a boost from. It's kind of a gimmick, but it's situational. A lot of the stuff in C tier is just situational. Like a lot of this yellow stuff, the yellow ones are situational kinds of things. Actually, if we're going to have a separate social media links thing, we're going to move social signals as a thing down to like F tier. But social media links are an actual distinct thing. Content syndication. Now, the one thing that you want to keep in mind with content syndication is that if your site has content where it's syndicated on a separate platform, you want to avoid the scenario where your syndicated content is ranking higher than your site's main content. Now, if you have an existing site that's pretty well established, this might not really be an issue, but if you have a brand new site, you might run into an issue where you make an article, you post it on like Medium or like dev.to or whatever, and that ends up outranking your main site. That may or may not necessarily be a bad thing if your main site is ranking really poorly already, so you might kind of use that as somewhat of like a parasite type page, but it is probably a good idea if you do have a really new site to let your site's content get indexed first to make sure there's no ambiguity that it was originally posted on your site. These are kind of like these sort of scraped syndicated links, except they're generally going to be a little bit higher quality. There's kind of a myth about duplicate content where if there's duplicate content anywhere else on the internet, the only one version exists. Whoa! Which is kind of bullshit. Search engines are aware that there are reasons why site content might be syndicated somewhere else. I've had pages rank where over half of the content was blatantly copy-pasted from other sources. Not like copyright infringement, but like already clearly existing on other pages, but it was mixed in with other stuff. That page indexed fine because there was a reason for it. So content syndication is kind of the same thing conceptually. You might have a lot of duplicate content, but there's no magic rule where, oh, there's multiple instances of this article on the internet. Only one of them is valid. That's not really how that's handled. So you actually can get some decent links from content syndication, although you do want to be careful and kind of consider it on a case-by-case basis. Like, did you just post this? Is your site going to be not super authoritative to where your syndicated content might outrank your actual site? You might run into some conflicts there, like from a technical perspective, but you can potentially get links. Personally, I really like to keep everything on my own platform. Like, I don't really like creating free content for other people's sites because I would rather do that for my own site. I could potentially see syndicating some articles, like almost on like general principle. I don't like syndicating content, like that's my content. If you want to link to it or have like a block quote or something, that's fine with me. But in general, I wouldn't deliberately syndicate content. If something happens to get syndicated, like by being scraped, I think that's fine. Like, I think it's even good, but I generally avoid syndicating things to, like, Medium. You could experiment with it. I think I am probably on the higher end of the paranoia about, like, content syndication spectrum. Like, I think some people probably don't care as much or worry as much. Like, they're not as concerned about their content kind of floating around. It's probably fine. I think the links can potentially be good. I generally avoid it, so I'm going to put it kind of in C tier. If anyone has experimented more with content syndication, this is actually one I'd be a little bit interested to know about. Like, how that's affected your search results and like how good of links or traffic you might be able to get off of this. I'm going to leave this down in like C tier, although I could be convinced to move this either up or down by other people who comment in this comment section below. Interviews, podcasts with other sites. This is a link building method where you go and you like do an interview with someone, or it could be like an article, it could be a podcast, whatever, and then you are like their guest, or maybe you interview them and then they link. You probably would both end up linking to each other. Either they would feature the interview on your site, like one site would have the interview, the other site would probably link to the other site, which is not like a link exchange. People sometimes think that like, oh, you can't link to each other. Like, that's not really accurate. There are valid reasons for doing that, and a podcast is certainly a valid reason. So I would say you can get good links out of this method, but again, it's pretty situational in that, well, one, you kind of have to be someone where you would either be a person people actually want to have on a podcast, so it would be kind of hard to do with like a new site. With an older site, it's potentially something you can definitely do. You might be able to interview someone else as well, but that's kind of the same thing. You want to be a source where it's like, well, is it worth their time to come do that interview, or is your site just trash? So I'd say it's a link building method that I think could be pretty effective if you already have a fair amount of, or at least a little bit, a moderate amount of reputation and authority in your niche. So I'm gonna even put it in like, I think it is also kind of a lot of work. I would probably put it in like C tier. Well, what is in C tier? I would even put it up in like B tier with like this kind of situational type stuff. I'll move this one. So I'd put it in B tier. It's pretty situational. You kind of have to have a little bit of an established reputation in your niche, but you could certainly use that to pick up some links if you were in a scenario to do that. Roundups and crowdsourced posts, kind of the same thing. Sometimes people will do like, we asked 100 skiers what they think about skiing. Here's our master list. Same thing. You can get good links, but you need to have some level of reputation in your niche. Otherwise, why would they put you in their roundup? So we'll put it in B tier. You could probably get some good links, maybe even some traffic if it's a big kind of roundup. Situational, you kind of have to have some authority already. Content site acquisitions. Now, this is essentially where you would go and you might even buy out a company in your niche that's failed or they've shut down, and then you might either redirect that to your site, or you might just run their site separately and kind of say, we also were owned by this or whatever. This is obviously potentially going to be fairly expensive, although it could also be pretty powerful. So if there are particular sites that are authoritative in your niche that went out, or even kind of smaller sites that could be worth picking up so that you can like redirect them for the traffic if there are users of those sites who are now looking for like a new supplier of whatever you sell. This almost, I think it kind of depends. This is almost more of like just a marketing method that isn't really focused so much on like the link building, although it kind of is. It's kind of down here with like 301 redirects where it's like, if you're doing it for link building, you'd probably want to make sure you do it in a way where the redirect's actually logical. Like if you're like a sports site and you acquired like a really specific kind of sub company about like skis, you might have a sub page called like, maybe you bought out like Lightning Bolt skis. You might have a page called like the new supplier for Lightning Bolt skis, and it redirects there and it says Lightning Bolt skis is out of business, but we also like have their same products, and like here's the products they used to sell, and now we have this supply and we sell this. So what I would say is if you do this, probably make sure it's done in a logical way, and you can probably even get some authority out of it. It's kind of a thing where you'd probably have to have like actually have a budget to do that, and you'd probably want to be a little bit careful with how you structure that so it actually makes sense. I'm not 100% where I'd put this. It kind of depends on what your budget is. I kind of even want to put this, I'm even going to put this just up in like this pile of shit where it's all just like situational, like super situational kinds of stuff. You can get some good results with that. And I mean, obviously people just buy out companies for other reasons. In terms of the SEO, I think it's a little bit situational. But if you do have an opportunity to do that, which I would say probably the majority of people aren't going to run into that scenario, like if they're kind of a more casual marketer, but you could potentially do it. And it is worth keeping in mind. And finally, we're going to talk about the Skyscraper technique. So this is a thing that Brian Dean from Backlinko came up with. And Brian Dean from Backlinko also likes to do this thing, which I think he does pretty effectively, where he'll like name a method. And a lot of times it's something where it's not even necessarily that exciting or that new, but because he named it, like people will start referring to it by name and then giving credit to Brian Dean, like, you know, what I'm doing right now. He also had another one called like the what's it even called? Like the man in the middle, or like the moving man technique, which is not even on this list, which is just like asking for 404 replacements basically. Oh, actually I should put that one on here. So the Skyscraper technique, essentially what you do there is You find the best content in your niche about some topic. So say you have an article about like the best way to ski on Mount Everest or something, which you probably can't even ski on Mount Everest, but who cares? And then you find the best piece of content and you write something that is slightly better. And the idea is no one cares about the second tallest skyscraper. They only care about the tallest skyscraper. So as a way to like write content, I think it's a fine content writing method, like a good concept, but it's not necessarily just going to magically get you links, like especially if people don't already know how to find your site. Like again, it's like a lot of these techniques, like a lot of these white hat techniques are things where it's like, yeah, like that works because you already have an audience. Like it's not going to work if you don't have an audience already. So I think that advice is almost where it's like, that's not super useful for your average site. Like the average person looking for ways to build links just aren't going to benefit from these kinds of like white hat techniques. Like the average person trying to build a site is probably not going to benefit from a lot of these techniques where they're almost like, well, if you have visibility and you write really good content, then you can get more visibility from your really good content. But the question that I think is more interesting for most people is like, how do you get the visibility in the first place when you don't already have that visibility? As a technique, I think it's fine. I also think it's kind of not super inspired and just sort of like a label on a thing that is, it's just a rename of a technique that everyone already knows about. And sometimes people will do like this follow-up thing with the skyscraper technique where you try to do like link stealing inferior links. Although again, I already said that's stupid and condescending and just obnoxious. So I think that part's stupid and condescending and obnoxious. As a way to write content, I think it's fine. As a way to get links, I think it's just kind of stupid. We'll say it's like E tier. It's a fine technique, but it's not like really a link building technique. It kind of is. It's not a bad idea. Like having good content is obviously good, but it's only going to get you links if people actually see the content as well. So there's the thing. You could maybe do this in combination with a social media campaign, but that's almost more like, well, that's just social media with good content. So it's essentially just saying content, make good content, whatever. The moving man technique is literally just 404 link replacement, but rather than try to do... The only thing about this that's unique relative to normal 404 replacement is that you try to find a company that went out of business, then try to get like all of their links or a lot of their links. It's just a variation on suggesting 404 replacements. So for that reason, I'm just going to group it with suggesting 404 replacements. It's essentially the same thing. I mean, it is the same thing. There's a slight twist where you try to like use footprints and shit to find companies that don't exist anymore or like sites that don't exist anymore. Again, it's the same. Again, that's kind of the same critique as the 404 method. No one replies to that shit. Like, occasionally you might be able to get something, but for the most part, they just feel like spam emails. All right, so this is the definitive tier list. There's a lot more stuff on here. There's a lot of like kind of like white hat, like guru-y type stuff on here. There's a lot of like guru-y type stuff on here in this second set. Let's see, guest posts are still the S tier of link building. And particularly, as I kind of mentioned, a lot of the stuff on here, like this kind of guru-y stuff, it's a lot of stuff where it's like, if you already have a reputation, it works fine, but for new sites, like guest posts work for literally any site is why I would say they're still like up here, just clearly above all this other stuff. Sponsoring events and venues is another good variation on donor and sponsor links. Social media links can clearly be very powerful. I might even move this up to like A. Like, I actually might even move this up to A. I think you can do a really good social media campaign. And they largest links, and they can be very strong links. And if you do it correctly, you can do them with pretty much any kind of a site. And you can also get traffic off of them. Like, they're one of the relatively few... Like, a lot of link building methods you don't really get traffic off of, but social media links you definitely can. Help a reporter out is very situational. So this right side, these are all situational. Content site, this is all, like, situational type stuff. Email people that you mentioned we'll put over here. It's not quite as situational. Expired Twitter accounts are kind of the same as expired Web 2.0s. I mean, they are expired Web 2.0s. Yeah, these are also situational. So all this stuff over here on the right side, this is all situational. On the left side, this is a little more general kinds of link building. C tier, still these. You can still do these cleanly. Articles predated for next year. I think that's almost too gimmicky. I'm even going to move this down to, like, D tier. I think it's gimmicky, but I don't think it's that clever, honestly. Maybe Steve disagrees with me. I think it's just too gimmicky. We already talked about GSA and XRummer. Local listings and directories are definitely better than just shitty fucking bulk directory submissions, and you could even make some sales off of those. They're not halfway bad. Some of them can actually be decent. Again, there's a limited number, so it's kind of, you can't really do that too much in terms of link building. Outreach is like a very generic term. It kind of depends on what you're talking about. Content syndication, I'd actually be interested to know what people think about content syndication. Affiliate programs are not really a link building method, although you might get links, but you're really just doing a whole thing. Resource page is very limited, and a lot of them are oversaturated. Stealing inferior links is just stupid, and no one does that. Link reclamation, again, is like fucking groveling for links. Don't do that. Microsites, a lot of work and you're really putting a lot of weight in getting it right, you might be able to do something better. I mean, I would say it's like 1 in 5 chance of doing like amazing, and then like a lot of times you'd probably just fuck it up. You might do a good job with it. I don't know. Skyscraper technique is not link building, it's just content. Linkable assets and link bait is basically just saying, again, make good content. These aren't link building techniques. Intern job postings don't last for a long time, so they're kind of irrelevant. Link exchanges, no one even does these, so they're not even really discussable. Editorial links are just sitting around and waiting. That's not a link building method. Let's see. Is there anything on here that's wrong? All the white stuff I'm pretty confident about. These are just the same thing. This could potentially even be lower. It really would depend on how skilled you are. That might be kind of controversial. This might be controversial, but I think that's correct, is that social media links can be A tier if you do them correctly. Although you have to be very clean with them, or else it's just pointless. If you don't do clean social media links, then you just, like, people just think that you're spam. And then they'll start to recognize you, and they'll just, like, keep blocking your posts. Or, like, they'll just downvote your posts, or, like, report your posts, or whatever. Alright, this is a pretty definitive tier list. I'd be interested to know about, like, people using, I'm kind of interested to know a little bit about, like, Haro, if anyone knows anything about that or has done more with that. Yeah, I think these are all correct. They're really situational, but you could... It's really... There really needs to be, like, a separate tier list that's, like, situational or something, or, like, a separate section. Situational. This whole section is situational, but they can be strong. Are testimonials up here? Oh, they're down here. Testimonials could even be up there. Actually, yeah, testimonials belong above suggesting 404 links. This is all just, like, situational shit. Like, B tier is, like, this whole half is just, like, situational things that are good, but you can't, like, rely on... You can't rely on situational links for all your link building. Content syndication has some limitations, but I think you can potentially do it. Actually, as a link building method, this is going down here. This isn't really a link building method. It's a lot of overhead if you're just doing it for links. I would if you want links, I certainly wouldn't recommend this unless you also want to do an affiliate program. In which case you might get good links, but it's like you need to want to run an affiliate program to do it. Articles predated, resource pages. Resource pages are fine. Resource pages probably belong. Well, there's just not very many of them. I think this is probably about the definitive tier list. This is probably the definitive tier list. This has like a lot more stuff on it, so I'd be interested to know about people's views on this new, on the new shit on here. Alright, this is the definitive tier list. Post in the comments if you want to question anything on here. Get the fuck out. Very nice.